So we're back again with SynthScaper, sort of. This is the newly released SynthScaper LE, a light edition of SynthScaper. Why do we need a light edition? Well, the main difference with the new version is you can run it as an audio unit, which means inside a suitable host application such as Cubasis or AUM, you can run multiple instances of SynthScaper LE. Now, of course, below the surface, it's doing all the same complicated things. It's exactly the same sound engine that we have in the advanced, what is now called the advanced version of SynthScaper. But we have to presume that by carving out a lot of the additional functionality, notably everything about creating sounds has gone from this edition. This is essentially, somebody in the Audio Bus forum referred to this as SynthScaper Player. And I think that's a pretty good summary of what this is. It's a performative, it's an instrument essentially. There are no facilities at all in SynthScaper LE for creating sounds. You get some facilities for tweaking the sounds modestly, which we'll have a look at, but you can't originate sounds. You can import all of the sounds from SynthScaper Advanced Edition into this version and play around with them. Incidentally, you can't import the other way, which is slightly unfortunate because this version comes with a whole bunch, well, not a whole bunch, but some new presets which are quite nice. That said, Igor tells me that he is going to be introducing some new presets in an update for or as a sound pack perhaps, for the advanced version as well. So coming back to the point, we can run multiple instances of SynthScaper LE, and presumably the footprint in the iPad memory is reduced. So when you run multiple instances of the application, it doesn't bog down the whole iPad. Now your mileage may vary. I'm running on a top of the line iPad Pro 12.9 here, and it seems to run, at least I've tried it with 2 instances. We'll look at the multiple instances in a while and what you can do with that. But you will probably run into trouble if you run many instances of this in parallel. Now this is not going to be a standalone review. I've done 2 previous videos on SynthScaper, and I'm going to make reference to the advanced version of SynthScaper in this review. So if you don't have any experience with that, you might want to check out my other 2 videos. Otherwise, some of what I say might not make sense. So the user interface looks kind of similar, but also somewhat different. We've got a different colour scheme, first of all. It's a little bit more subdued. You can't change the colour scheme as far as I know. Don't think you can. So there's a single colour scheme. That sort of circus tent effect is kind of gone. It's not quite as gaudy. But we've got, basically, if you look at the bottom half of this screen, we've got the same. This is standalone mode, by the way. The user interface looks different, as we'll see in AU mode. But in standalone mode, everything from the middle of the screen downwards is the same, apart from the colour scheme. Almost. So we've got the same keyboard, which is this rather peculiar, but actually extraordinarily flexible and interesting on-screen keyboard. I won't go through it again. In my first SynthScaper video, I went through this in great detail, so you can look back at that. But we've got almost all the same functions here. So we've got this pseudo velocity sensitivity. We've got things that can change the glide and so on. We've got the finger swipe, which controls controls some modulation. Now you might, just a word on that. Oh God, I'm getting out of sequence here. We'll come back to that. So we've got the keyboard pretty much the same as in SynthScaper Advanced version. The only difference that I can discern is, although you can change the height to be full height, you don't have a split function, so you can't have 2 keyboards on screen at the same time. As far as I can tell, everything else is the same. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. We've got, as we have in the advanced version of SynthScaper, we've got 3 noisemakers, which are now referred to as generators rather than oscillators. If you look to the top left of this screen, we've got those generators listed from left to right, generator 1, 2 and 3. in this preset, generator 3 has this init legend in the space where the name of the the generator preset should be. It's also muted. If you look down towards the middle of the screen, there's a mute button. So it's a 2 generator sound. We can mute each of those in turn, those 2 sounds. So that's one of the sounds. Mute the other one. So that's generator 2. Generator 1 is making a much more subtle sound. It's got a much more gentle attack. Oops, I muted them both. So moving our attention back towards the middle of the screen, again you can see the generators 1, 2 and 3 listed left to right. And if we choose generator 2, in fact I'll mute generator 1. So just as we can in the advanced version, we can control the distance from the listener, we can control the pan across the stereo field left to right, and we can control the level. Look at the middle column of that spatial mixer it's called. I'll change the level to go up, so a lot louder. If I change the distance to bring it nearer, further away. Well, the distance is not particularly obvious. If I change the left and right panning, that should be more obvious. It's slightly out to the right. Now it's all the way out to the left. Kind of hard to do this one. So that's what that does. So you can do that independently for each of the 3 generators. We've also got, if you move over to the right even further, we've got the reverb and the master level for unmute generator 1, so we get the whole thing again. So master level down does what you'd expect. We've got an auto level control. If I put that on, maybe that's not so obvious if I choose a different preset. That's with auto level on. And with it off. Well, you can hear that, but it's subtle, but that's what it does. Then we can control the reverb, again towards the right of the screen, just to the left of the level. We can control let's try the space. So that sounds much more enclosed. Whether you can hear that or not, that's how you change the reverb. Again, that's functionality we do have in the advanced version. It's just represented differently. If you look towards the top of the screen, to the left we've got fairly self-explanatory area where we can select the preset. Again, we've got presets in 2 different senses here. These are called scenes. A scene is a combination of up to 3 different generators. So that's one way to choose presets. For each individual generator, if we click on that sort of little oval shaped thing below the name, we get to a preset select, which is a preset for that particular generator. While we're on this preset selection screen, if we just look over to the right, there's a number of options, so we can tinker with that and save a scene that we've messed around with. We can import scenes, which I'll come back to in a little while. We can assign a hotkey. If you look at the center of the screen, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These guys here, we've got 6 hotkeys, so we can choose a one and then just assign it to a hotkey. So the other things along, it's kind of like a tabbed dialog. If we click these legends along the top. The main screens that we're interested in terms of playing with the sounds in SynthScaper LE are the mixer, the tuning screen and the keyboard screen. So those three. We'll look at those. We've looked at the mixer screen already, but we'll look at the other two in a minute. There's also an Arpeggiator screen, which we might take a look at towards the end. There's a MIDI screen, which is setting up the MIDI. It's got a list of known keyboards. It's a very short list at the moment. My keyboard isn't on that list. I've got a Studio Logic SL88 keyboard, but it doesn't matter. It just means it's got a number of presets for some particular keyboards. I think Igor may, in a future update, he was canvassing people for details of specific keyboards. So as he builds a list of a database of keyboards, he may well add extra keyboards as a convenience in future updates. And of course you can do all sorts of other things. You can specifically map. So this keyboard that I'm using, for example, it has got some default mappings, but I could map my joysticks and so on to things like keyboard hold or mute and so on if I wanted to. So I'm not going to go into that. That's all very familiar stuff. Now most of these, there's a gotcha here with SynthScaper, both the LE version and the advanced version. It's not really a gotcha, but you have to remember that at all times you've got three separate generators working, up to three generators working in parallel. And on most of these screens you can choose between those. Well, on this screen it's more obvious. On the mixer screen it's more obvious because they're all visible. But in the Arpeggiator screen, in the keyboard screen and in the MIDI setup screen, you have to make sure you've chosen the generator that you specifically want to work on, and you must not presume, or you must forget, that's what I'm trying to say, that when you're tinkering with parameters on screen, you're not setting those parameters globally for the whole sound. You have to set those parameters individually for each generator. That was a hopelessly garbled explanation, but you can probably make some sense of it. What can I do next? We'll look at the tuning and we'll look at the keyboard screens in a moment, but before we do that I'm going to come back to something I started to say earlier about the keyboard. If I hold a key, one thing that's missing actually that we have in the advanced version, I kind of missed this in the advanced. I think I just showed. When I press this is in the advanced version, so it sounds the same. But when you press the key, because we have this visual representation of the spatial mixer, you can see things happening. There's animation, there's those wiggly lines, and there's the sort of expanding green blob thing towards the bottom centre of the screen. So we don't have any of that in the LE version. I'm not bothered about that, but what we have in this version that would be helpful is if you look over to the most left hand side of the screen, we can see for each oscillator, which is the three sort of square regions down the left hand side of the screen, when we press a key we see these little green LEDs kind of things light up, and there's 6 of them because we've got up to 6 voices, so you can not only see which oscillators are actually making noise. I'm saying oscillators because you're in the advanced version here and they're called oscillator, but you can see how many voices are active for each one. Now the reason that's useful is in the LE version we don't have any visual indication of which generator is making the noise. Now that's sometimes, it's sometimes just confusing, where the noise is coming from, and sometimes you'll find yourself adjusting the sliders, nothing seems to be happening. It's because you're adjusting sliders for the wrong generator. So now obviously you get some sort of visual feedback when you're using the on-screen keyboard. That doesn't show you which generator is playing. So that's no help. I do have my MIDI keyboard set up as well. So yes, coming back to the on-screen keyboard, I just wanted to point out, if you click, you'll know this if you've got the advanced version, if you click and then drag, let's choose a different one. Now that controls, in some sense, modulation of the sound or sounds. Now you might think that that's quite a simple thing, that that's like moving the mod wheel on your keyboard and it controls something like, in this case it sounds like there's some sort of filtering going on there, so it's probably controlling the low pass filter cutoff. And you might think that's all it does. You can assign it to a particular parameter and it's controlling that parameter when you swipe your finger up and down. Now that is by far oversimplification of what's going on. Don't forget that these sounds are generated in an incredibly rich way. You have got not only 3 independent generators playing, up to 3 generators playing in parallel. Each of those individual generators is itself composed of up to 3 layers, and those 3 layers can be generated from 3 individual different sample sounds. But it's more complicated than that as well. In terms of the modulation, if you look, when I swipe my finger up and down, we have this under the generator, to the top left of the screen, under the generators, we have this EFX1 dial is changing. So this, in the keyboard setup, the finger swipe has been associated with the FX1 control, but you shouldn't assume that that EFX1 control can only modulate a single parameter. If we just think back to some numbers, each generator has 6 parameters that can vary. Those are the level, the balance, the low pass filter cutoff, the high pass filter cutoff, the address, mask shift, and the pitch. That's 6 parameters. In addition to that, each generator can have its own up to 3 custom effects selected from a pool of, I think, 21 effects, and each of those effects has an additional 6 tunable or modulatable, if that's a word, parameters. And what those parameters are depends on what the particular effect is. So if it was another kind of filter, it would have cutoff and resonance, for example. So that means for one generator you can have up to 12 parameters that can be modulated. In fact, it may even be 13, because you can also modulate a LFO frequency or the LFO depth. I don't think you can modulate the depth and frequency at the same time. So in a nutshell, for each generator you can modulate up to 13 parameters, and there are 3 generators, so there are 39 possible modulations that you can hook up to that EFX1 slider simultaneously. So in principle we could be swiping our finger and modulating 39 different parameters. In fact, I've set something up just to demonstrate that in a small way. I'm not going to demonstrate 39. If I go and select this one, oscillator 2, layer 1, 4 parameters I've called this. I had to create this in the advanced version because, as I said earlier, you can't create sounds in the LE version. But this is, if you look to the top left of the screen, you can see that the generator 1 is muted, generator 3 is muted, so only generator 2 is producing a sound. All it's producing is a simple square wave. That's on an LFO that's panning the balance parameter. So you can hear that. If I slide my finger, the first thing you notice is it's varying the pitch. That's one parameter. If you listen harder, you should hear the LFO frequency changes, getting faster as I swipe down. That's 2 parameters. As I swipe towards the bottom, you should hear a filter cut off. That's getting darker. That's a low pass filter cutoff. And as I swipe up, it's getting brighter or tinnier. Can't do that. That's a high pass filter cutoff. So all those 4 parameters are being modulated simultaneously by that one finger swipe. So take my word for it, you could go up with another 35 parameters on there if you wanted. And then when you run this as an AU and you run 3 of them together, you know, the mind just boggles. Where are we? If you want to know about that modulation and how all that multi-modulation works, that was one of the main subjects of my second SynthScaper video, so you can go and watch that and that'll do your head in. So if we just take a while to listen to some of these sounds. What else can we talk about? Let's see. Let's talk about the other 2 important screens. We have tuning screen. Now, tuning is an unfortunate word. I would have called this tweaking. Myself, tuning, it's not primarily about the pitch. It's about these things that you can see. If you look, the generators are now laid out in a vertical sense. So generator 1 at the top, generator 2 in the middle, generator 3 below. Generator 3 is muted, so we're hearing just the sounds of generators 1 and 2. If I mute generator 2, right, I've muted generator 1, so we're just listening to generator 2 at the minute. And if you direct your attention to the second line on the screen, this is the things that we can tweak for this particular generator. The first one is the attack. This is now offset. Again, if you're familiar with the Scaper apps, the notion of offset is you can set a parameter to a particular thing and then you have a fine adjust, which is generally referred to as an offset. So in this situation, we can adjust the subtleties of the attack. So in the design of this soundscape, over in the advanced version, we've set up a very complicated set of things to build an attack for this particular sound, and we can tweak it here. If I just let me see what we can hear. So that's got quite a fast attack, so you could sequence that, quite a percussive sound. If we tweak that to the left, we'd expect it to reduce the attack. Well, it's not very obvious because it's already quite short. Maybe this will, if we go to the right, it should increase it. Oh, now I'm doing that thing that I said you should be careful not to do, which is I'm playing the only unmuted generator, which is the middle one, and I'm tweaking the dials on the top one and concluding that it's not working because it's not affecting the right generator. We'll try that again. Middle generator, middle slider. Well, that's made the attack much slower. That dial seems to be doing what I expected mostly. If we move it to the left, we're getting a more percussive sound because the attack is truncated or it's shortened. right up to 91% there. For some reason when we get to minus 100%, now I'm tempted to say that's a bug, that some arithmetic error there is actually giving us the effect of plus 100%. I can't be sure that's a bug, but that's my interpretation. We can tweak the release, so we can shorten the release. Okay. That's default. So it's doing something. There's a sharp cutoff. Go back to the center. Okay. What else? Accent. I'm not sure what this does. It does something to the combination of the decay and the sustain. I've forgotten. I read that Igor has put out a tutorial on this. There is, in fact, if we press the question mark to the top right, we get a manual. So we could look in there and find what the explanation of that is. The manual, by the way, is half size screen at the moment. That will change in a forthcoming update. It's very inconvenient there. So if I try that accent, see what it does, see if we can. Well, it's not doing anything particularly obvious with this preset, but take my word for it, it does something with the sustain and the decay and the sustain. Tone adjust, what does that do? That does something to do with the detuning of something. Let me see if we've got that in there. Tune panel, tone adjust offsets in cents from the bass tone which is defined in a preset for each layer. Okay, so what it's saying there is often the design is done with over in the advanced version for a particular generator you use the same sound but with some detuning which gives you a kind of a chorus effect. So we'll see if we get anything on this one. This will depend on the actual design of this sound and what's on those layers. There you go. That was definitely... Okay, so that's the tuning. That's an interesting preset. You'll notice when I press the key, two different keys, there's a sort of slide or a glide between them. Now this oscillator, now this preset has two generators in it, generator 1 and 2. Let's just see if we can isolate one of those. So we'll stick with generator 2. We can hear that slide. And to understand that, we can look at the next screen of interest. That's the keyboard screen. Now there's a bunch of things on here. Let's see, what can we talk about? Let's look at that slide first. That's a glide setting. And if you look over to the right of center, we've got a thing that's saying glide mode, and then below that we've got a dial saying glide, which is actually it's set at now once again we're caught out. This is by default, this is shown as generator 1. If we go back to the mix, the only one we've got active is generator 2. So back to keyboard, we need to press generator 2. That 0.06 didn't make sense. If you look at the glide setting for this screen, for this generator, it's on 0.384, so that's about a third of a second. So I'm doing that with the MIDI keyboard as well, but if I do it on the screen, so So what's happening there is when I hold down a key and then press another key, the pitch changes over a period of about 1/3 of a second. That's what that glide setting does. If I make it longer, that's 2 seconds. That should be way obvious. In fact, that glide is almost longer than the sustain of the note. If I make it shorter, in fact, I double tap, it goes to 0. There is no glide. Something wrong with my keyboard at the minute. Maybe it's my fingers are too dry or something or other. So that's what glide does when the mode is set to key. So what that does is while a key is held and another key is pressed, the glide is in operation. You can change that glide to operate slightly differently. If you click voice instead of key, if I leave it at key and slide my finger left and right, there's no glide. If I set it to voice, while that voice continues to be active, in other words I hold my finger down, we get the glide. And again it's about 1/3 of a second. If I move it higher, it's still gliding after 1 and a bit seconds, 2 seconds. So that's what glide does. We can turn off the screen keyboard. So I'm now tapping it. You can see it on the display, but it's having no effect. But the MIDI keyboard is still active. I can turn off the MIDI keyboard. That has no effect. We can transpose this key, this particular sound. So if we play a C, if I go down by a semitone, playing the C again, it sounds like a B. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, one reason why you'd want to do that is to, again, because we don't have complete access to the layers and the construction of the sounds, you might want to tweak. This is another way to tweak. In fact, I think I was playing around with this. If I go for, where is it? This one. I think it's this one. This is a 2 generator sound. And if you want to use this, it's, I mean, I should say that most of these sounds sound very good and thick and rich when you play them with one finger. So most things sound good with one finger, but sometimes you want to play chords as well. Now this one is a good example. This doesn't lend itself to playing chords. And the reason is there's kind of already a chord built in. This has 2 generators that seem to be set. I think they're about they're a seventh apart. If we play that one, and then we play the other one. So, getting back to the keyboard screen, we can use that. If we go to generator 2, let's just listen to generator 2 on its own. So this is what it sounds like. If we dial it down by a 7th, or 7 semitones rather, that should match generator 1. So that's playing a unison now. So we should be able to play a chord. Yeah, and that sounds right. We're not mucking up with the sort of harmonic design of the preset anymore. Okay, so that's one thing we can do with this screen, transposing. We can transpose it by smaller increment cents. I think that's where I'll leave it for the keyboard screen. You can look at this in more detail yourself. just in terms of, you know, how you play this, I've got this, as I say, I mean, it's, okay, if we put in, let's say this Jupiter, that's a good one. You know, you get some amazing sounds, but you can be much more expressive in some ways with the on-screen keyboard. But what we're going to see is, well, two things. One is it's sometimes you want to play with your MIDI keyboard. The other thing to say is when we look at this as an AU, you're going to find that you don't have the on-screen keyboard available. You just have a regular conventional keyboard. But if you want to play more conventionally on your MIDI keyboard, this tweaking screen, tuning screen, which I'm calling tweaking, comes into its own again. If we look at, well, this one, in fact, we'll just stick with this. No, we'll stick with Crystal Planet. Now that's fine, but you've got a kind of an unwanted side effect of that glide setting, which is that, so playing this conventionally, you get that unwanted glide. So that's, so we can fix that by going into the tuning, the keyboard screen, and we can turn off generator 2, turn off the glide, and then we can play that more conventionally. So that's one thing to say about playing with the keyboard. What else? What have we got? But you have to just, you know, you have to trade that expressiveness. You know, it's a trade-off between the expressiveness of the on-screen keyboard and the, I suppose, the advantages of a MIDI keyboard, which are you've got a wider spread. You know, you can play it more conventionally. You've obviously got controls. The controls on this keyboard, the mod wheel or joystick is by default mapped to that FX1 parameter for all the sounds, the generators. It's louder on screen than it is. It sounds like a banjo. Why is it louder on? Generator's really level. It does sound like a banjo. Enough for that. So let's have a look at this as an AU3 plugin. To do that I have to do some reconfiguring. Let's see if I can do this on the fly. And we can find audio bus. Let's run 2 instances and split the keyboard. That's the most basic use of 2 instances of this. So in fact I need to do that differently. If I go input, go studio, port 1, channel 2, I'll get an instance of audio units, SynthScaper LE. I've put channel 4 by mistake. Channel 2, thank you. So the bottom half of the keyboard, A0 to B3, controls that instance. Put in another instance. We want SL Studio channel 1 and a new instance. New instance. They're both set to the same preset, no doubt, at the moment. So we got if I go into the first instance, which I hope is the bottom of the keyboard, you can right. So now we're seeing the user interface in a different environment. This is in the AU hosted environment. It's basically the same. If you imagine that's drawn in vector graphics, it seems kind of more spidery and skinny to my eye. We've lost the keyboard. Well, we've got the conventional keyboard. We don't have that extra expressivity of the SynthScaper keyboard, which is a real pain. Well, it's not a pain, it's a shame. It's a trade-off we make. I guess that might be to do with the lightness of the application, as well as we were talking about at the beginning. You know, that keyboard is very sophisticated and flexible. Maybe adding all that code in increases the footprint. So it's been left out. We can dial in the factory presets from there or in the conventional way. So all that above the center of the screen works pretty much the same. Got the mixer, the tweaker, the keyboard, MIDI setup, ARPs, which we might look at. So all that works the same. You can hide the keyboard, then you get, oh, it's in your face now. If I choose a different preset from here, for here, in fact, oh, okay, just another thing to, oh, I accidentally chose one there. But it's different. You can see they're playing different. They're both quite piano-like. Well, that's piano-like. And that's organ-like. Make them very different. So we're playing Electric Shadow down here. So you can see it's one of those very evocative, rich soundscapes. Oh, and middle C, we switch to playing that other. Make that, let's find that banjo-like one, because that's, what I was going to say was you lose the, we've lost the quick preset, what do you call that, the hotkey bar. So those 6 hotkeys that we had, we don't have access to those in here. I don't think we do, can't find them if we do. Okay, so we're playing 2 different instruments essentially with the split keyboard. I'm not going to try and do anything musical with that because I'm not really up to it. Pretty much everything else is there. So that's the basic use of 2 instances. We'll show you just another use briefly. If I take that out, make the second instance so it's now mapped to the whole keyboard with no split, and instead of the keyboard we'll map the first instance to something that will automate it. You know, another great boon of having the AU3 is you can do much more in terms of automation. So if we just put something in here, let's put in a Rosetta particles, and we'll just leave it at default. So that's played a minor key. Change the gate length to be very long, whole bar. see, the other thing we'll do is we'll make that. So we'll make that much more sparse in terms of the number of particles. We'll make it a little bit faster, otherwise we won't hear it. So that's good, but we can still play using our other instrument on the keyboard. Again, that's not very musical. What can we do? Go into audio here. Instead of sending those straight to the output, if we send those to AUM, I hope this is going to work. I've already got AUM running. Okay, we're back. I had to add the microphone back in manually there. But now we can play with the voice. We could have done this in audio bus as well, but I didn't. So we could change that preset to be, you know, something much more esoteric. So let's give us quite a creepy soundscape in the background. And we could play against that with something like the banjo one. It only sounds like a banjo in the high registers. Lower down, it's much more. Well, there it is. I mean, again, not doing anything particularly musical there, but let's go back to our single standalone version. Get rid of audio bus. We still got the microphone. Yep, we do. So that's just about it for SynthScaper LE. Let's look at one last thing, which is the Arpeggiator. We didn't look at this when I looked at SynthScaper advanced version, so I might as well just take a little look at it. I mean, it's a very complex screen. So this is two things. It's an arpeggiator and it's a sequencer. If we look at the arpeggiator first, again, don't forget this is three different arpeggiators / sequencers for the generators. The mixer, this sound, this preset is a single generator preset, so we're looking at generator 2. So we select generator 2, that's what we're looking at. You've got arpeggiator set by default, we've got up as the direction. What else to it? So what should happen, and we need to put active. So if I play a single note, what's it doing? Well, it's a 16-step sequencer. It's playing quarter notes. If you look at the top left dial, that's quarter notes, or quavers in old money, I think, or semi-quavers, I don't know. Don't ask me about music theory. If you look at right in the middle of the screen, there's 4 red squares with X's on them. There's actually 16 steps there. They represent rhythmically the 16 steps of the sequence. If I fill all of those in, the red ones are the ones that are going to play. press the key again. So that's a single key. If I play a chord, if I play E, G, C, which is I think an inversion of G major, C major, it's just playing those in sequence. It'll play them down in a down section direction if I change that setting. If I play up and down, up and down too, and random. That's what the arpeggiator does, so we'll forget that for now. We'll look at the sequencer. If I click sequence, okay, I've clicked it from arpeggiator to sequencer. I'll leave active off for now. What we need to look at now is if you look in the centre of the screen, this strip of kind of blobs. This allows us to select which steps of the sequence we're going to program. If I click 8, which is towards the middle of that, it selects steps 1 to 8. So it's going to play 8 steps. We can now set the particular notes using the dials underneath those blobs. I'll just set them randomly at the minute. And if I set... but it's still going to play rhythmically. It's going to play those 8 notes in sequence, but only on every 4th step, according to that rhythmic pattern in the middle, which is reset itself to the default. If I press active, it's not very inspiring. If I just change those, I can change them on the fly. If I change it so that those 8 steps are played on every quarter note, that's kind of cool. As that's running, actually, if we look to the top left of the screen, we can change the timing. We'll change the timing. We'll leave it at quarter notes. We can change the gate, which makes it more less smeared out. It chops the notes off more quickly. Change the swing. And change the glide between notes. That's a bit of a dog's dinner. That's pretty much all I'm going to say doing it from scratch. If we just load in a couple of pre-made or sequences, and then we'll say a bit more about it. Now that gives me an opportunity to show you how to import files from anywhere really, but mostly from sounds you've made in SynthScaper Advanced. Now let's go over to SynthScaper Advanced. There it is. If we go in here, we'll see that there is a group called ARPs, Scene Pack ARPs, which is mine, but there's a group called ARPs. Now these ARPs are things I've made. I'll just show you, to get these out of here and into the LE, you have to create a scene pack, which you do by, if you're in a group, click pack, well it says unpack, so it's pack or unpack, and make scene pack. If you say OK, I've done this before, so it's going to create a duplicate called Scene Pack ARPS 1. So we'll come out of that, go back into LE. Let's go into presets, and we're going to click import scenes. So I've selected on my iPad. You can select other things like browse, Dropbox, iCloud, all that business, audio share. We'll go for on my iPad. I've somehow changed how it looks. I didn't mean to do that. And we're going to look for SynthScaper, and we see that Scene Pack ARPS 1 that we just created today. If I click on that, importing scenes. So now there's a new group appeared called ARPs, and I've got some arpeggios in there. If we just choose one of those and go into the ARPs tab. So we've got 16 notes programmed, we've got 16 steps programmed, quarter notes. It's active, but it's not running. Why is it not running? Well, because I've selected, instead of sequencer, if I set it to sequencer, it runs when active is set. If you click keyboard, if you set keyboard start, it only runs when you press the key. And it's taking the start point from the key that I'm pressing on. I'm pressing on the MIDI keyboard. If I press on, you can see that finger swipe is modulating the sound. If I select keyboard shift, just switch it off. Let me just rewind a little bit. If you use keyboard start, then the specific notes that are programmed along this sequence of dials, it's a kind of a relative sequence. So it's relative to the key that you select on the keyboard. If you select sequencer, it's C3 is the starting point. If you select keyboard shift, same applies. C3 is the starting point. The difference is it will change when you press another key on the keyboard. I think that's all I'm going to say about the sequencer for now, because it strikes me that, you know, the sequencer is so complicated and rich, I suppose, that it probably deserves a video in its own right. So maybe I'll make another one just about the sequencer. So that's an introduction to SynthScaper LE. It's available now in the App Store. It's available as a standalone product, or there is a bundle where you can, if you have SynthScaper, you can get it at a discount, or you can buy them both, I guess, at a discount as a bundle. And then you can go mad and create yourself all sorts of interesting sounds.